No. All right, we're recording. All right, Ed, welcome to the Tucson blockchain channel, and thank you for stopping by. So starting off, could you tell everybody a little bit about what your background is?
Well, sure. I'm a financial advisor, a wealth manager is what we call it today. And I grew up at Morgan Stanley, running the high net worth group in the Southwest. And over time, developed our own business. And one of the things that really caught my attention was something that happened many years ago when my mother was dying. I realized something called the cost of living adjustment, COLA, and how that was impacting her life, and how fortunate it was in a weird way that she passed away before the negative implications took grip of her life. What I mean by that is that the government has a cost of living adjustment that they make. They call it the CPI, and they make adjustments every year. But that number's been manipulated since 1983. And it's been manipulated to be lower so the government didn't have to pay out as much in higher prices each year. And that really caught my eye. And so I think the purpose today is to discuss the Chapwood Index.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what is the Chapwood Index, and how did you create it?
So what I originally thought about was trying to get all of my clients to write down what their cost of living increase was each year. We all know what the cost of living is, all right? Like, living in Tucson or living in Orange County or Oakland or New York or Chicago, you know what your cost of living is, but the difference is your cost of living increase. This is what kills people. And it really focuses on something that's near and dear to you, Alex, and that is wealth disparity. And it affects middle income and lower income people more than it affects higher wage earners. And the reason that's the case is that the higher wage earners, they make more money based on their productivity than they do based on somebody giving them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So what I mean by that is, let's take somebody who works and they make $50,000 a year and they're middle level management at some company. At the end of the year, somebody will come to them and say, you've done a good job. I'm going to give you an increase based on the CPI. And the CPI doesn't reflect the real world anymore. And so what they'll do is they'll give you an increase of, let's say the CPI increase is 1%. They'll give you 3% increase. So 2% above the CPI, but that doesn't come close to reflecting what the real cost of living increase is in the world or in your city. Tucson, it's about 8% a year. So if you don't make 8% more each year, then you're falling behind. And the CPI doesn't reflect the real numbers, but that's what everyone uses in the private sector when they're giving increases to middle level management and lower income people. And so each year they might get a 3% increase, but their real costs go up 8%. So they're falling 5% behind every single year. And this is a huge problem. So I created this index to do it city by city. And I do 500 items, and I do it twice a year, where I reflect through my Facebook friends. I have friends in all these cities, and they go out and they get the numbers for me. And we do a real cost of living adjustment, or I shouldn't say adjustment, but a real cost of living announcement of what the real cost of living increase is per city. The cities, Alex, that have the highest number are usually in cities that have high taxes. Mm-hmm. So the high tax increases are usually trickled down to the end product. So if you have a Oakland, California, and Long Beach, I tend to use often in these analogies, their taxes are increased all the time. Well, that comes back to you in products and services, and that's why it costs so much more each year to live in those cities.
Sure. Yeah, it is pretty wild, and I'm really glad that you came up with um, the data for Tucson specifically, because there's not a whole lot of financial data out there, city by city. And wealth inequality is something that is killing our city. The average person doesn't understand the importance of this. So taxes plays a big role into the increase in the cost of living uh, for a variety of reasons. Would you be able to talk some more on why that's an issue?
Well, you've got when taxes are increased, they has to come from somewhere. And usually, if taxes are increased in a city for city rent, for instance, they're going to increase the prices. The business is going to increase prices on products to make up that money.
Sure.
Or if there's a new toll road, or if the toll road prices go higher. And a silly analogy I make is that, let's say in the state of Washington, uh, the toll goes up on a truck that's delivering apples. Well, if those apples are being sold in Virginia, they're going to increase the price that the store that bought the apples has to pay for those apples to take care of the increased toll, and then they're going to pass that along to the end consumer. So it all trickles down to the end consumer. So if you have high taxes in a city, that's usually where you have the highest cost of living increase. And so again, look at Chicago, look at Baltimore. Uh, most of the cities on the West Coast that have high taxes are the highest tax increases. And again, it's important to remember that it's the increases that matter. It isn't just what your cost of living is, it's that increase. So if you don't make 8 or 9% more each year, then you're falling behind. And that's where this wealth disparity that you're prominently supporting the discussion on comes into a really difficult situation, because most people aren't going to get 8 or 9% increases. Okay, I mean, they're just not going to.
Sure.
So
Sure.
you have to encourage people to become revenue producers where they can make money based on their productivity. It's a huge problem that no one talks about. One day I'd love to have a 60-minute feature story on this subject, because the ripple effect is destroying the country. When they started changing and manipulating the CPI in 1983, and then they did it again in 1994 under the Boskin Commission. He was a professor from Stanford that was put on with the task to show that your CPI was lower. Everybody wants the CPI to be as low as possible, but it's not. It just isn't. Think about your electric bills, your water bills. Think about all the different bills you have and start really adding up how much your prices are going up. They're not going up just 1%. Okay, not at all. And this is why you have a lot of people who end up committing crimes, because they do everything that they can and they get to a threshold of pain and they have no choice but to possibly do something illegal. And that's another reason. Nobody wants to go out and commit crimes. Nobody wants to do bad things. But people, when they get to a point where they have no choice, people will do whatever they have to do to survive.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely apparent when you look at countries like Mexico, where there's a really high barrier of entry to do things legally. And you have oligarchs really running the country. The crime becomes a really lucrative way to go about things, and that's the problem with taxes. It just raises the barrier to entry. But yeah, I mean, that's why I'm a big proponent of capitalism in general, because I feel like it is inevitably where we go to as people. It's the most efficient way to go about things. And we look at countries like North Korea that have some of the most restrictive laws when it comes to the economy, and they have a flourishing black market, really allowing people to survive. So what you talked a little bit about why the government manipulates CPI. Could you talk a little bit more on that?
Well, what the government has done is they've gone out of their way to make prices remain low. So there's three different ways that they have done this in the past, but to focus on one, they would say that if you were eating a steak and steak prices went up 30%, they would say, well, you could have had a hamburger and that only went up 5%. So they would replace it with something that didn't go up as much. That's one of the things that they do. They also leave out a lot of things like food and energy.
Sure.
They leave that out. And there's many other techniques that they do to make the CPI a lower number than it really should be. But they used to have 1,700 items that they tracked every single month, and they were tracking it until 1983, and the inflation rate was at 13%. And then overnight, when they changed the way it was calculated, it dropped to 3%. Well, think for a moment, Alex, about all the people who were getting increases of 13% to keep up with how much the costs were truly going up. And then they came out and said, no, that's not true. It's only going up 3%. So now people got a 5% raise, maybe, or a 6% raise, maybe. And the real costs were still up 13%. And this has been going on every single year. So somebody who gets Social Security increase, they get a 1% Social Security increase. Well, their costs have gone up 8-9% a year. I mean, you ever notice that when grandparents get much older, your presents get worse? Okay. One of the reasons is because of this. It's because they have, the money is not growing, and their money doesn't go as far. And that's why, you stop seeing your grandparents as much, and they don't travel as much as they used to. And your presents, you used to get $100 check for your birthday. Then it was 25. Then it was just a card. Okay. Which is fine. But that's what happens because the government has been doing this, and it's been a horrible thing. And it's probably one of the most important things for you to take away for what your mission is, which is about income inequality, because the income inequality comes from the middle and lower income people. Their increases are based on the CPI. People who are 1%ers or business owners, their productivity or their increases are based on their abilities. Okay. So it's not somebody giving them a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Think about a restaurant owner. If they're making money, then they're making money, and they'll be able to make as much money as they can based on that restaurant. And that's based on their abilities. And think about an attorney or a CPA. They have the ability to make as much money as they possibly can based on their output of, whatever they're able to, bring in. But they also can make no money because they're entrepreneurs.
So why do you think this conversation isn't discussed more on a larger scale?
Yeah, I don't know. There's a man named John Williams. He runs a website called shadowstats.com. And he is sort of a mentor of mine. And he and I talk about it all the time, about how damaging this subject matter is and how important it is for people to know and understand it. And we can't, for the life of us, understand why more people aren't talking about it. But it's so obvious. Everybody knows that your costs go up a lot more than 1% a year.
Sure. Yeah, one of the crazy stats when I was looking at the Chapwood index, specifically for Tucson, is it has the first half of 2020. So you said you collect the data twice a year. And it says in the first half of 2020 so far, we've already experienced an 8.1% increase in cost of living. Do you think that means that we have the potential for that? Because it looks like it's been pretty steady over the past 4 years between 2016 and 2019. Do you think due to the unprecedented printing of money and government stimulus that we're going to see inflation rates jump pretty dramatically?
Well, I don't think you'll see the government inflation number increase
Yeah,
because they'll do what they can to keep it lower. But I do believe that you'll see an increase in real inflation, your real cost of living increase.
sure.
Now that number, by the way, is for a full year. It's for the second half of 2019 as well.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
I might not have made it that clear.
Okay.
I couldn't get the numbers for the second half of 2019 because of COVID.
Sure. I was going to say, if we stayed on that track in full 2020, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but if we hit a 16% increase, that'd be pretty scary
Yeah.
and dramatic. So yeah, I mean, the average person, their wealth is getting debased. And inflation seems like it's kind of a hidden tax. Milton Friedman called it taxation without legislation. What do you think the solution for the average person is?
To get another job. I've thought many times about this, and people have asked me that question many times about, what should somebody do? And you really have a simple answer, and that is get another job, or get a job where you get paid based on your productivity, not somebody dictating a thumbs up or thumbs down based on the CPI. It's as sad as it can be, but that's the truth. There's no other way to look at it.
Sure.
You have to be the steward of your own destiny, and the only way to do that is to have a full say in what your income is.
Yeah, I mean, 8.1% inflation rate is pretty crazy to compete with, and we know that the majority of Americans store their wealth in just cash. And the bank does not even come close to offering interest rates to compete with that. So it's a battle of consistently getting poorer and poorer. And so getting another job would allow for somebody to afford their basic needs and maybe put some money away and invest. But at the same time, they're losing out on so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible answer, but it's the only real answer. I could
Sure.
sit there and say, oh, well, they should, you know, do this, or they should go back to school, or no. The answer is a lot of people are stuck. They're 45 years old and they have a wife and children, or they are a wife and they have a husband and children, and they're doing everything that they're supposed to do, and that is they're going to work, they're paying their taxes, being good corporate citizens, but every year they fall further and further behind. And this is a subject that I wish more people would talk about, because the only answer is for them to change how they make money.
Sure.
There is no other answer, and that is either find a different job or get a different job that complements what you're doing. But the only way you can do that is to become a revenue producer.
Sure. Have you ever seen the website WTFhappened in 1971.com?
No.
Okay, it's kind of a cool website. So 1971 was the year that we came off the gold standard, and I'm looking at this figure right now of CPI, and it looks like a rocket ship taking off right after 1971 when we came off the gold standard. So I think it's interesting that you reference the manipulation of CPI in 1983 and was it 94 as well?
Right. Yes. But they do it all the time, but that's
Sure.
the main part.
Sure. And I think that's pretty telling that so right now in the broader discussion, there's been some talk of different solutions for wealth inequality. One of them has been UBI. Another one has been tax cuts. talk of universal health care, things like that. Do you think any of those are potential solutions or would be helpful?
No. I don't know what you mean by UBI.
Universal basic income. So like sending everybody $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what people would do with that money. I've heard recently a lot of people who are getting PPE money and, were showing up in Vegas and spending it. It's not enough money to make a difference in someone's life. I mean, the problem is very big. So I don't know if the UBI would make a difference. It could be a band-aid for a period of time,
Sure.
but you've got to get to the core of the problem, and that is they've got to be able to save money, and most people don't have any savings, and that's why this is so tragic right now.
When you're managing your clients' portfolios right now, do you have any exposure to Bitcoin or gold and assets like that?
Yes, I don't have anything related to Bitcoin, and gold. We own some gold positions, but not a big. There's the argument that because of the printing of money and the devaluation of the dollar, that you're going to see gold rise, and you probably will. I prefer to like silver and diamonds more than gold. I like diamonds because you can buy them at a discount to what they're worth, and they go up just like gold does.
Yeah, I think we're kind of entering just a time frame or we're entering kind of a place in history where we're having to get creative in order to store our wealth, or potentially it's looking like today the markets are looking pretty bad and tanking pretty hard across the board, and we're all looking for stores of value. Do you think that there's a future where money is tied to gold or another scarce asset?
I don't know. I'm not that smart to be able to say. Um, I don't know and don't believe it'll be tied to gold. There's lots of conversations about the U.S. not being the currency when China did trades in Australian dollar a couple of years ago, and so but that's something that I'm not that familiar with.
Sure.
Um,
Sure. Let's see. Yeah, I'm really excited that you're having this discussion around the cost of living. I actually I went to my boss. I work in behavioral health as like my day job, and the Tucson blockchain is more of a hope for the future, an entrepreneurial venture. But I went to him and I presented the data uh, that you had accumulated, and so they give us a cost of living increase, which is pretty small. It's about like a 2%.
yep.
It's a big reason why I don't really count a whole lot on that paycheck, or I try and stash as much money as I can in assets I think that are going to increase in value over time, rather than just holding it in cash. But it was funny, his reaction was he kind of laughed at me, and there's a lot of anger directed right now, specifically at people's employers. But I think the thing that's hard is they're essentially incentivized to behave this way. Um,
I had the
because
SEI, I had the SIEU, use the index for their negotiations, because I mean, anybody who's negotiating, and let's take, your boss at what you do during the day, your behavioral science company, if they're looking you in the eye and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a 2% increase, well, you basically just lost 6% purchasing power each year. And they're able to do that because the government has put out this number that is not true. Same thing with people in their pensions. So my in-laws retired from ConocoPhillips, and he gets a paycheck, but the increase is based on the CPI. So every year it goes up just a little bit. I mean, and that's why, his gifts to my kids have gotten worse all the time, and so on. I mean, it's a really terrible thing. But your employer, should really take to heart that what he's doing is making your life 6% more miserable.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's why minimum wage is such a big discussion right now. But unfortunately, yeah, minimum wage has some negative effects, kind of like what you were talking about earlier with the increase of taxes. It makes it harder for businesses to operate, and
the minimum wage is something that a lot of restaurants, when they were open, would have a hard time with, because they would go out of business. I have a friend of mine who has a hamburger franchise called Elevate Burger outside of New York City. And he said as soon as they were going to $15, it would make all the burgers much more expensive because everything would trickle down. And he said it would be impossible for them to run the business.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, it seems like policies like that tend to benefit the bigger firms that can eat the cost of it and pay for automated solutions. Like McDonald's has all of these iPad type things that you can order on now, which means less people working, so they can easily eat those costs versus like a smaller franchise like you're talking about that can't even begin to compete. So yeah, well, it's a pretty crazy time right now. What's bringing you hope and meaning during a time like this to weather the storm?
Well, in terms of business, we're doing what's right. We're not getting caught up in the high tech phenomenon. The 7 stocks that are leading the S&P 500 higher, and we're buying into single B and double B rated bonds, and that's where the sweet spot is in the bond market. And so our portfolios are doing fine. And I believe that it's going to take a long time for things to get back to any kind of normalcy, without question. And I just hope that people are able to hold on, because mentally it's really tough for people.
Yeah, I feel like this discussion is more important than ever. And I really appreciate the motivation behind what you're doing. And I feel like mine is kind of similar in the sense of like my mother, my father passed away when I was 15 and left her. She was initially a stay-at-home mom, left her with not a whole lot. She was uneducated financially, even though she was working really hard, and went back to school and got a master's degree, and wasn't able to do much with it, raising us 3 kids. But it's just, we were fortunate in a lot of ways. But there's so many people out there that aren't. And I think people that are in those types of positions, single parent households or dual income households, especially during a time like this, exceptionally vulnerable. So to be having a discussion around these topics that are so important and really might allow people to experience a sense of freedom is really helpful to me personally during a time like this. Um, uh, Driving meaning.
Good.
Yeah, I'm glad that your business is doing well because there's so many that aren't.
Yeah. Well, in our industry, we're doing fine, but it's been a difficult time. A lot of it is psychological to try to convince people to hold in and believe in the future. But now when you look at the future, you have to start to wonder what the future is going to look like. Um, Real estate prices are going to fall without question. The ripple effect of businesses not being able to pay their rents and mortgages are going to start to be a drag at some point on the big banks. And that's going to then have a ripple effect, and taxes are going to have to go up. Even though Trump says if he's reelected, he's going to cut taxes. Then you start wondering about the deficit or the long-term debt. I mean, just recently they announced, I think it was yesterday, that for the first time, I think since World War II, our nation's deficit will be higher than what we bring in.
Mhm.
I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yeah,
So those are things that concern me.
sure. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of these modern monetary theorists really point to Japan as an example, and I think Japan's kind of a scary. I would like to see your index and what it looks like over there. I think
Oh,
their debt to GDP is like 200 and some percent.
yeah, it
Um,
is. Yeah, there's no way in the world that they should be afloat. The only reason they are is that so many are mandated to buy the Japanese bonds.
mhm,
But um, at some point, who knows when, but at some point, everything's going to implode.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, the scary thing, like you talked about the banks, and I've got this background of Jerome Powell. This has been probably my favorite meme of 2020 so far. But he promised that they'll provide the banks as much liquidity as they need, and I think they lowered the um, reserve requirements to zero, so the banks can lend out as much as they want. I think the reserve requirement on hand was like 10% before this crisis, and now it's zero. So they might not have any. Some of these banks might not have any cash on hand, which is kind of a scary proposition. But yeah, I mean, the implosion that is coming, and the only tool that is at that our the Federal Reserve and our government has is money printing is kind of a scary proposition. Um,
Yeah, it is. It
but I'm
really
really
is.
excited.
So
Oh, go ahead.
no.
Yeah, one of the areas I'm really excited about is Bitcoin in particular. The experiment of non-sovereign money that is auditable, uh, that we can all audit the supply, knowing that there's 21 million that will exist, which is kind of a stark contrast against the dollar, which is we can't audit, and the numbers that are provided by it, like we talked about quite a bit during this interview, that the numbers that are provided to us by the government are not accurate or reliable. Um, it's kind of an interesting idea, and I think is really exciting for the average person, especially in these developing countries. Like right now, what we're seeing is Venezuela um, and Lebanon are going, and even Iran. Iran has a lot of Bitcoin mining, but a lot of these countries that are experiencing rapid hyperinflation have really large amounts of people that are growing to use Bitcoin. I mean, the go-to always is the dollar, but there's been dollar shortages globally in these countries, and it is nice and I think hopeful to know that there is a kind of a plan out and a bailout for normal people to have a medium of exchange and store of value in something that something like Bitcoin. But yeah.
Yeah, I've never, every time I get into a discussion about Bitcoin, I get yelled at by people. I've had a lot of experiences talking about it, and I believe that there's a lot of smart people like yourself that are big supporters of Bitcoin. I just don't see it as a viable currency right now.
Sure.
But again, then this is when, like, if people watch, then all of a sudden I get these text messages, and they're mean usually, and I get yelled at, and I'm being told what a fool I am. But I just try to avoid that subject.
That's fair. Yeah.
See,
And I think that's unfortunate, because in a time like this, it's really important to have conversations built on nuance and different bouncing different ideas out, because we're really, and it's probably the last thing that people want to do, because when there's fear and uncertainty, we just want to shut down and latch onto ideas that seem safe to us.
yeah.
So I can
And even
understand.
before this, I just didn't talk about it because I find it to be a very strange subject. But
Yeah, I mean, it is very strange. There's not really any context for anything
no,
like Bitcoin in history. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's why I like to refer to it as an experiment, because it is very unprecedented, kind of like the internet is, or a lot of these different new technological advances. Um, so yeah, where can people find more about your work?
by going to the chapwoodindex.com, CHAPWOOD index.com. And I put it up there. You know, I don't make any money from it. I did it, as I stayed on it, really to reflect back to my mother, because it was something that I didn't know enough about at the time. And then as I learned more about the Chapwood, I learned more about the manipulation, it really caught my attention, and I felt like somebody needed to make a statement. So I decided to.
Sure.
So those numbers are updated twice a year.
And I'll make sure to link that in the video description to the website. Are you on Twitter?
Well, yes, I am. I'm at Ed Butowsky, EDBUTOWSKY.
Awesome.
And I put out a video. If anybody wants to get it, they can go to chapwoodinvestments.com and sign up. I have a video blog that I put out every once in a while. In fact, I'm going to make one here in a couple minutes on interest rates. But I put stuff out that's educational. That isn't so much about what to do with your money, although I tend to get a little bit more detailed than I should. But I think that the feedback I get is that it's been very helpful. It's called Making Sense.
Awesome.
So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the channel. And anybody watching, please check out more of Ed's work. It does some really good stuff. He's on YouTube, having been interviewed by a lot of different people. And yeah, I just feel honored to have been able to sit down and talk with you for a little bit.